Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we're breaking down a complex courtroom case centered on a fatal shooting, where the key questions are intent, conspiracy, and self-defense. As the trial unfolds, the defense challenges the prosecution's narrative, urging the jury to focus on what the law actually requires and what the evidence truly shows about what the accused knew and believed at the moment everything changed.
Excuse me in advance for a couple of things. I did get a chest cold. At first break, we'll ask his owner for some coffee. Also, I apologize in advance for the fact that I'm 61, which will be evident from my mouth. What this case is about, when you come to a courtroom in our country, and you sit as peers, chosen because you promised to uphold principles that overarch every single trial where the government is accusing a citizen or peer. Those principles become what a trial is about. Now, what someone believes, think might have happened, if you read a story, you heard a story, what you might believe. Four corners of this courtroom are where this trial occurs, and what happens here is what matters to entering a verdict, and what the principles are is the absolute key. In this case, we'll test these principles. We will test these principles. It's easy for you to think that the state has created a narrative through the evidence, that's the argument, if their case should result in a conviction. We ask you, since these principles, which, let's face it, the blood of men and women in our country have spilled sometimes on foreign soil to protect, be constantly in your mind as you assess the case, as you assess the witnesses, as you assess the evidence. I'll take this opportunity also to note that the state of the burden, so they put on the case. They're going to call the witnesses for the next number of days. They're witnesses, they're not the state's witnesses. We'll go next after they get asked questions. And please pay attention to the answers to our questions and the way those answers are given at times. That's important. And when you do, please consider. Principles, you're going to hear them all throughout. You heard them in jury selection. You heard them in the introductory instructions from His Honor. But they are the presumption of innocence, the burden of proof, and that proof has to be beyond a reasonable doubt, and this is important. And I appreciate Mr. Pomeroy brought it up. I'll disagree with his reference to you that the state has to prove that the evidence best explains their theory. That is not. You've had an instruction and you get it a bunch of times. They have to disprove any real possibility that Kevin Ellis knowingly entered a conspiracy and carried it out in a manner that wasn't justified. That's what the burden is.
The defense reminds the jury that this case must be decided only on what is proven inside the courtroom, not on stories or assumptions, and that Kevin Ellis is presumed innocent unless the state proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They stress that the prosecution must disprove any real possibility that Kevin did not knowingly join a conspiracy or that his actions were justified, and that these legal principles must guide how the jury views every witness and piece of evidence. Do you think the state will be able to meet that high burden?
And I submit that the state in this opening statement has flipped the script on these charges. I believe that you will see that the evidence in this case is such that they need to bring evidence that proves that the conspiracy existed, to satisfy their next argument that what happened in the room was not self-defense. And that's because under the law that applies, it is not about the entire case that the government must prove is about what Kevin knew. And it doesn't have to be accurate. You're going to see it probably wasn't. He was given all sorts of information this evidence is going to show. That would be up here that probably wasn't accurate. In fact, tragically, because his sister and his mother, as co-conspirators, there definitely was a conspiracy, the evidence will show. Fed it to everybody, and especially who they end up calling their hero, Kevin Ellis. Their, I'm sorry, simple, fool-playing, somewhat deadbeat son who was down on his emotions and openly was. And that's what will not happen. Because not only will, when this evidence is fully out, fully tested, and some of it the parent will have to bring and learn that state will not present some evidence, and if not, and it's important, we'll bring it to you. And then, so they must prove what Kevin knew and what he believed at the time he fired. That is the narrow scope of what needs to be proven in this case. And without a conspiracy, if you find beyond a reasonable doubt that he's part of a conspiracy, you can't have self-defense if he's only part of a conspiracy. It won't. We'll get to that, and you partly heard it at the very end, that we'll have to rely on the evidence to show that Kevin was part of the conspiracy, and that's because what you're going to see is, as this all happens, where is Kevin in it? There will be a big hole in this evidence as to evidence against Kevin. Evidence that Kevin's part of the conspiracy that is developed, enacted, and completed by Kate and her mom, Tracy, who did Kevin. Let's talk about the kinds of evidence for a minute that, as far as we see, again, Alma's right, this is a roadmap. This is kind of how the lawyers think things are going to trot out at this trial. Let me take this opportunity to say that the evidence will show, you will see when we examine witnesses, that we largely have to rely in this opening statement on what we've already received. Reports, things that the police have done and they put in reports, and the results of interviews that other people did. You'll hear what happens sometimes when we try to get an interview with people. Like Kate, even Kate, who's free to talk to everybody and talk to the prosecutors and talk to the police and everything, but we're not made available to us. When we get to that, I'm going to talk about Kate in depth. But keep in mind that the best I can do right now is anticipate things based on what's been told to me. I got access to a lot of this. And you'll hear that from the evidence. I'm not testifying, I'm telling you, I'll ask the witness. If we try to get a hold of you, why didn't you said no. At any rate, the evidence won't prove that Kevin knew that there was a plan, ambush knowing that, and shot knowing that Matt was not a danger. These communications between all these people, let me stop here again and say, none of us, all of us, we cringe at the notion that something happened that caused the police to go to the bars and look it all over.
The defense argues that the prosecution is reversing the burden by assuming a conspiracy and then using it to reject self-defense, even though the law focuses only on what Kevin Ellis knew and believed at the moment he fired. They claim the evidence will show Kevin was not part of any planned conspiracy, that critical information given to him was inaccurate, and that the real planning, if any, came from others, leaving a major gap in proof against Kevin himself. If the state cannot show Kevin knowingly joined a conspiracy or understood there was no real danger, can their case truly stand beyond a reasonable doubt?
And I guess the state's going to trot out a lot of texts in this family that are, food mode. They didn't like that. And you're also going to hear a lot of things that Kate told them, true or not. And then them is the family, and them is the Kevin. This family shared and believed to make them not like me. Some things that they saw and observed in their lives that made them concerned about it. Here then described him as erratic. He had a serious alcohol problem. Whether or not that was in play when he walked through the door that night is not the question. It's what Kevin thought, what Kevin knew, what information Kevin had been given. And these communications, they're all about Matt. What is he coming? He's scary. Should there be protection? Does Kate need to be protected? This is all the information that the evidence will directly or circumstantially show was likely in Kevin's mind. You just heard a timeline. Now, as I give this, I'm not going to propose, as Mr. Pomeroy said, to solve the case. You'll do it. Roll up your sleeve. And be on the front of your chair, please, as this trial transpires. And it's certainly with regard to certain features. They mentioned the timeline. I don't think, respectfully, that it'll ultimately be exactly like Mr. Pomeroy said, but especially the timeline of the night of shooting. Pay attention when we ask the questions about that timeline of witness. Please, put this forth in the filter criticism about. I already spoke about everyone's fear. I already had time on my PowerPoint. I already spoke on that subject. But the evidence will be that these people were on pins and needles. So we talk about why their attack is place. Also, you're going to hear, and I'll talk about the investigation in a second, but it would have been very, very easy to know within a very short time when it was placed, why it was placed, where it was placed, etc. They just called Carolyn Fisher, who picked up Kate and facilitated her flight from California, whose idea was, hey, we should put the air tags we used at Disneyland, put one in Matt's truck. Who knows? Maybe he'll chase us down. Maybe he won't tell the truth about the truck being stolen or something. And ultimately in July, use that when they're trying to know where Matt, who's the person they like to believe he is traveling to the sister. Guns. There won't be much issue about the gun that was fired at this thing. Now it's he shot him. It's clear from the evidence that it'll be clear what the gun is. The evidence would be that Tracy had his gun for years. Tracy had a gun. Tracy's gun. What you're going to hear, by the way, was from Kate and others. Evidence would be is a mastermind. A control freak. And masterminded did it. According to Crillon's daughter. And that air tag, again, the significance of it is to track Matt. But the key is why. Why do people believe that? There'll be more. You'll be paying attention. You'll find it. The reason I'm putting this up is these people in this picture, or the ones on the family tree, They are the children of Tracy Grist. State's theory is, and he supports it, Tracy Grist, the mastermind in putting together a plan, which sounds like might have been Plan D, when Matt was hit. They knew Matt was going to come out to harm him. Or, unfortunately, to have him. Two of those things are not like the other by that point in time. One in the middle. Tracy and Kate.
The defense explains that the state will rely heavily on emotional family text messages and statements describing Matt as erratic and dangerous, but stresses that the legal focus is not whether those claims were true, rather what Kevin Ellis knew and believed at the time of the shooting. The jury is urged to closely examine the timeline, the flow of information Kevin received, and actions like placing an AirTag on Matt's truck, which the defense says reflect fear and planning by others, not Kevin, while highlighting alleged gaps in the investigation and pointing to Kate and her mother Tracy as the central figures driving decisions and communications. When you consider the timeline and the information Kevin was given, does the evidence clearly show what he actually believed in that moment?
They got Kevin to be their champion without him knowing who things. That's the real possibility. Frankly, it's likely possibility that this trial is going to be. And you're also going to learn that the witnesses, the police and the government just refuse to have you consider by the end of this trial. Yet they're the ones that know. It's interesting what Tracy can do on the evidence in this trial. You're going to hear how she can affect everybody. This family and even neighbors. You're going to hear from the neighbor who had a bullet come in her house and who called 911 and such about how Tracy tricks her, fools her. She's even part of the family that Tracy can get in, convince of things that are not true so that she can get what she wants to have. And that's why I picked this up, because they are a source of information about what people thought, what people knew, and that the people were kept. But I really want to spend some time here with Kate for a second. And I do want to unpack a little bit about the role. Again, we get to expect what Kate's going to say in this trial because we see the process by which Kate was arrested, prosecuted, saw the government's evidence, saw transcripts from the hearing, and ultimately cut a deal and gave statements. She gave statements before she was arrested. Everyone's going to agree that it was. As I said. And pretty chilling. The evidence about Kate luring Matt into this house, communication with Kate, when you hear them, or going to say them. And it's going to be absolutely clear. There's no reason to believe that I had any idea those were going to. Matt doesn't die and he never did. And she didn't do. She was already. Tracy didn't think that he never feel that David like that. But Kate is now coming to testify. She's got a deal. It is going to be critical for you. It sounds like weight cross-examination. Don't think Kate's going to directly implicate Kevin. That's the state. And I submit to you that if she does, you will see that she never did before. What Kate does is after having seen everything, all the evidence, you're going to see ends up through her lawyer communicating with the state about the desire for a plea bargain. Something happens to the effect that the state sends her a plea bargain offer. And then the plea bargain offer is clear. Get a deal. What you're going to hear is years, probably, off her sentence. She's supposed to have her lawyer send in a proffer statement, it's called, the suggestions of things she might say to the government in an interview and with testimony. That they didn't condition this plea on testimony is obvious. She's already said it. And the state conditions, you're going to see from the evidence, Kate's plea bargain on what she says in her interviews being truthful. So, her lawyer sends one in. A proper letter, a letter of, here's some information you'll learn if you have a debrief with Kate. Who, yes, has admitted there was a conspiracy masterminded by her mother that she engaged in to lure man into the house, knowing he would be her to kill. One that Tracy initiated and planned. Not a plan discussed with Kevin. Tracy took advantage of Kevin and his mental health issues. And the captain never discussed details about shooting Matt with Kevin. And that Tracy distanced her communications with Kate from her communications with Kevin.
The defense argues that Kevin Ellis was unknowingly used by others, raising the real possibility that he was manipulated without understanding the larger plan, while claiming the state and investigators want the jury to overlook Tracy's influence over family members, neighbors, and even witnesses. Attention then shifts to Kate's role, emphasizing that she is now testifying after securing a plea deal, one conditioned on her statements being deemed truthful, despite earlier accounts that allegedly pointed to a conspiracy driven by her mother, Tracy, without Kevin's knowledge or involvement. With Kate testifying under a plea agreement, how should the jury weigh her credibility and motivations when assessing what Kevin truly knew?
So they have an interview. And in the course of this interview, you're going to hear that as they get through discussing Tracy and Kate's plan, masterminded by Tracy, Mom, taking advantage of Kevin's mental state, the Kate tells the police, well, Kevin was never around. I didn't really see him that day. Again, I never talked to him. He wasn't present with me and my mom on any of the occasions we talked about a conspiracy. You're going to hear her say, didn't really see him, that they made preparations to move these toys and blanket, that Mom and Tracy did that. Kevin wasn't there. You're going to say, at one point, I think around 3 o'clock, if you see that wrong, whatever time, it sounds like theory is that Tracy took Kevin that day that Matt's driving over to sushi. Kate will admit that Tracy never said what she talked to Kevin about at sushi. Tracy never said that she told Kate anything about whether she talked to Kevin about a plan. For instance, versus he's coming, we need protection. Kevin didn't seem different after the sushi. That the scene, according to what the state required her to be truthful in telling, was my mother's plan and presented as I was scared shit. You're going to hear that it wasn't going, it didn't seem to be going so well for the states that they took a break. She could go talk to me. Then they brought up an immunity agreement when they returned. Well, wait till you see what they did there. There was lots of talk about Kevin and his involvement. That talk was by the police. They weren't Kate's words. But Kate does say, when they're talking about evidence, she never deleted any text from Kevin. Again, never communicated, never talked to him about a plan, never deleted any text. Kevin is not in the picture, according to Kate. Sure, he shot after her, and that's the state's theory. You should convict because he fired. A couple days later, Detective Nordine went out and had another brief follow-up because they had never asked Kate any questions about whether she talked to Tracy or anything in the 3.5 months that the two of them were out of custody together, living together, and even testifying falsely at a hearing regarding Kevin's detention. Then she entered a plea. And the evidence is going to show that in connection with getting ready to get sentenced, Kate wrote in what she described to the government something that took her 6 hours to write. It's a handwritten description of what happened.
The defense highlights Kate's own statements to police, where she repeatedly said Kevin was not present, was not involved in planning, and never discussed any conspiracy with her or Tracy, emphasizing that preparations and decisions were made by Tracy and Kate alone. The defense points out that even during interviews, Kate denied communicating with Kevin about any plan, never deleted texts, and placed responsibility on her mother until later, after breaks in questioning, immunity discussions, and a plea deal. Her account evolved, culminating in a handwritten statement prepared months later as she moved toward sentencing, raising serious questions about credibility and whether Kevin's role was defined only by the fact that he fired the shots, not by prior conspiracy.
You're going to see that it continued not to directly implicate, Mr. Pomeroy's statements were directly implicate Kevin. Continued not to. Certainly continued to implicate Mastermind Tracy and Kate. And in fact also had some timelines and things that were not exactly consistent with, or at least satisfying to the state's theory. You'll hear that once the state saw this written statement, they went and had another interview with Kate in December last year. They didn't get anything out of that either that directly implicated him. And this is a person they're presenting to you because they entered into a plea deal with her. They would only do if she told the truth. I don't know what she's going to say up there, but that's the evidence that I expect you to hear. It does not implicate that. Tell the truth. That's what the evidence will show. burden of proof, right, is burden for the government to bring evidence that proves through usually investigative means. You'll hear means that police use on their own discretion and determination, or can be directed by the prosecutors to go and do more. They're detective in their office. They control, have the ability to use all these resources. A concern, if you're doing an honest investigation, is of course something that we now commonly hear and is described as confirmation bias. He fired, he must be guilty on all counts. If you take that position, and the evidence will show that that's what happened, you just support evidence that favors that theory, you ignore or excuse evidence to the contrary, and you're disinclined to change your belief. I think police officers hopefully do their best not to have that happen. This is, by the way, a subjective thing that happens to us all. I think you're going to find that, unfortunately, he shot, therefore he conspired, and he conspired, therefore he didn't have self-defense. Creates a problem in this case with no attempt to investigate the real possibility Kevin was led into this, duped into this, set up for this in the plan that Tracy had with his sister Kate. Because while they did a good job going in and proving up the conspiracy between Kate and Tracy, which, as Mr. Pomeroy said, was a dragnet of a lot of communications. Then, by the way, you're going to learn that Diane, bless her soul, mother of a dead son, you can all imagine that. I'd already solved it 2 days later in a phone call that Tracy and Kate had to her, but setting that aside, he shot, therefore he conspired, and you stick with that, and it creates confirmation bias. And they prove up the conspiracy, and as they're proving it up, with all these communications, have all these communications. It's sad for everybody that you only talk about things in the way that they expect we're going to be read someday. But every bit of it, as they collect the evidence here, comes nothing. There's no direct discussions with Kevin about what to do.
The defense argues that even after multiple interviews and a written statement, Kate never directly implicated Kevin in any conspiracy, instead consistently pointing to Tracy and herself as the planners, with timelines that didn't fit the state's theory. The defense suggests the state relied on a flawed assumption, he fired, therefore he conspired, leading to confirmation bias, where investigators focused only on evidence supporting guilt while ignoring the real possibility that Kevin was misled or set up by Tracy and Kate, noting that despite extensive messages and investigation, there is still no direct evidence showing Kevin discussed, planned, or agreed to any conspiracy.
There's no, sure they all share the AirTag, and you'll see communications are, that's coming. You'll hear these family members that I pointed out to you, they're like an aspen group. I mean, they literally share their roots. There is nothing one knows that the other doesn't know. I submit to you that that's just going to show. I'll protect you. Kevin can protect her. You're going to see things like that all throughout these communications. None of that has Kevin in it yet. That doesn't give the prosecutor the same pause. They don't consider communications that actually might suggest that Kevin could be duped. It would work better to dupe him. It would be better to use him in this plan if he didn't know. The big picture's never studied. Putting this all together and understanding the role Kevin has, not only in the case, but in the evidence and in the motives, And then the two-person conspiracy, and they just don't consider the family. And that sounds like you hear all kinds of things from family members in this case. You're going to learn that, in fact, in this family tree, Rory lived at the house when the shooting happened. Never, ever interviewed. No attempt. Jacob Trujillo lived in the house, left in the daytime of that day, and was headed back in the nighttime when he found out the shooting incident occurred. And his sister said, "Don't go there." That it never called, never contacted by the police. Rachel, they're going to present. Tim Ellis. You'll see the communications about how Tim thought he might need to come over to be protected. What should his role be? Sure, they're all going to have poop emojis and stuff. He didn't like that. That's true. But there'll be evidence, a person can have evidence of this family dynamic and what everybody was afraid of and whether that might include Kevin. He was never contacted. I'll take it back. What you learn in the trial is that he was put on our witness list, and when they saw that, they put him on theirs. Talked to me the first time we did. Because I don't made up their mind. These principles, of course, there's much more. And we ask you to be on your seat, thinking to yourself about things, thinking whether these things make sense. Disproving that Kevin is not a part of the conspiracy. You do play a role. And it's in this courtroom in that chair because of what Tracy did successfully. They're there to protect a person. They have to be absolutely applied to every aspect of a case in this trial. And those rules apply to this case. The end of it, maybe a couple of weeks of trial. I believe will render very significant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Mr. McCauley, please play your first witness.
The defense closes by arguing that while the family shared information, fears, and even tracking data, the communications consistently framed Kevin as someone meant to protect, not as a knowing participant in a plot. They point out that investigators ignored signs that Kevin may have been used precisely because he didn't know the full plan, while failing to interview key family members who lived in or were connected to the house that night. The defense urges jurors to step back, look at the entire family dynamic, and apply the core principles of the courtroom, presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, before deciding whether the state truly disproved the real possibility that Kevin was not part of any conspiracy.